Hey everyone, this Star 43216 here, bringing you another In Flames review. Today we're going to be talking about the third album in their discography, titled Whoracle. Now, if you didn't know, this album is actually a concept album. I just found that out recently when I was doing research into the album for this review. And apparently, the album sort of tells the story of the advancement of human society and technology to the point where they create a futuristic dystopia and then destroy themselves. So keep that in mind as we go through the songs. I'm going to sort of talk about how they apply to the story that's being told in this album. Well, at least the specific tracks I'm talking about, because I'm not going to talk about all the tracks on the album, otherwise we'd be here all day, because there's a lot to talk about on this album. Now, the first track on the album that I want to talk about is the opening track titled Jotun, which is one of my favorite In Flames songs of all time. There's this amazing melodic guitar intro and main riff that's just, I just can't stop listening to it. I've listened to this song on loop a ton of times, and it's probably one of the most played songs I have in my collection of music. There's a lot of interesting stuff happening on this song, in the song lyrics, which sort of tells, it's sort of like a foreshadowing of what's to come in the album. It sort of the lyrics talk about how society will basically nuke itself, and then we're left with this dystopian world with, like, no laws and stuff like that. And it's sort of telling about, it's told from the point of view of someone who's always afraid that the world is going to kill itself, basically, and is afraid of what's going to happen after that. The next song I want to talk about is the third track, Gyroscope, which was actually originally included as a bonus track on a reissue of the Jester race. It was from an EP they released between that and Whoracle, but it made it onto the album. I really like the guitar riffs in the song, and then there's some parts where the bass isn't just following along with the song, where it's sort of doing its own stuff, especially in the acoustic interludes in this, the acoustic intro and interlude in the song. The bass sort of stands out more than it does on other tracks on the album. And this has some really interesting lyrical content too. It's sort of, some of it's a little weird because of the translation issues from Swedish to English. So, but overall, it's a pretty good song. The next song I want to talk about is one of my favorite songs from In Flames, called Dialogue with the Stars, which is a 4-minute instrumental with some really amazing synchronized lead guitar playing and some cool acoustic stuff, and some cool stuff happening with the bass too, and some pretty cool drums. There's some cool drum fills and stuff in this song too. But anyway, this is one of my personal favorite In Flames instrumentals and one of my favorite instrumental songs of all time. It's definitely one of the standout tracks on the album. The next track I'm going to talk about is The Hive, which is actually one of the songs off this album that the first time I saw In Flames live, they played this song, and I was impressed that they played it, because I'd heard that they don't really play a lot of their older stuff anymore, but both times I see them, they've played some old stuff, and this was the first time I saw them, they played this song, and I really, this is one of my favorite songs on the album. And it also has the best solo on the album. There's not a lot of really standout solos on this album as compared to the Jester race, where there's a ton of really cool and interesting solos happening. But the Hive has this really great, pretty long solo at the end, which is one of the better solos that In Flames have created. It definitely makes the song a lot better, and this is one of the songs you should check out on this album. The next track we're going to talk about is called Jesper Strömblad Transfigured, which sort of, the lyrics talk about how, like, humans have used technology to augment themselves and create, like, the perfect human, except they're living in a dystopian world, sort of, where there's not really a point of being perfect. And this song has some really cool acoustic, synchronized acoustic parts, and a really fantastic melodic riff towards the end. And I really like the way this song sounds. It's slower compared to the rest of the album, but it's an amazing song, and this is one of my favorite songs on the album. It's definitely one of the songs you should check out if you're only going to check out a few songs. The next song I'm going to talk about is Words Within the Margin, which is probably my second favorite song on the album after Jotun. It has some cool spoken word parts in the beginning and towards the middle. And then it's got this cool keyboard part during the verses. There's just no guitars, it's just drums, vocals, and these cool atmospheric keyboards, and it sounds really awesome. And there's some great guitar riffs in the song and some pretty interesting lyrics talking about how the advancement of human technology has created this crappy world where it's completely dystopic and humans are just not knowing what to do or they're confused and there's just all this weird science words thrown around in the song. The lyrics kind of are weird. Some of it's because of translation issues, but some of it just feels like they're just throwing random words around just for the sake of throwing random words around. But overall, the song comes out really good, and it's still one of my favorites despite the weird lyrics. The last song we're going to talk about is, actually there's two more I want to talk about because there's an interesting cover that's included in the album. But the next song I'm going to talk about is Episode 666. It's got some cool melodic riffing in it and a cool part in the middle with synchronized guitars, which happens a lot in this album, but there's a really cool part on this song. But the main reason I'm talking about this song is because it concludes the story of the album, sort of, in a way, where it talks about how after all this advancement of human technology, they end up throwing it all away and destroying themselves in some sort of apocalyptic event, which is, of course, perversely televised on television for the whole world to see, and they're just perversely enjoying watching the world blow itself up, which is I thought was kind of funny. The last song we're going to talk about is the cover of Depeche Mode's Everything Counts at the end, which at first it might sound weird to include a song like this, but the cover is really well executed, and in a way the lyrics sort of talk about a sort of a lesson learned, moral of the story type of thing where humans realized too late that the human nature was responsible for destroying the wondrous technological advancement that human society experienced. So in a way it's a fitting way to conclude the story of Whoracle. Now that we've talked about the tracks and some of the concepts that are explored on this concept album, let's go on and look at the sound of the band. Anders on vocals. The vocals are not as low and growly as they were on the Jester race. There's a little more screams and a slightly higher range of vocals, but I don't think the vocals are executed as well as they were on Jester race. They seem sort of like Anders is struggling with them a little bit in a way. This seems sort of off. I don't really know how to describe it, but it's not his best vocal performance. But his lyrics on this album range from a little odd, like on Episode 666, there's a lyric that's "Welcome here, the squirrel wheel begins." Like, what does that even mean? But there's also some really cool lyrics, like in Jotun. Like all the lyrics are really very, very spot on. So Anders did a pretty good job here on both vocals and lyrics, but it's not his best work, I would say. Let's talk about Jesper, Glenn, and Björn on guitars, because Björn also has previously provided some of the guitar work on this, especially since there's so much guitar stuff happening on this album. At points there's like 3 to 4 guitar tracks happening at once, so there's a lot of different stuff happening with guitars, so they kind of need 3 guitars to be working on it at some time. Although obviously when they were playing it live, Björn was on drums and they only had 2 guitars, but in the studio there's a lot of stuff happening on guitar. There's some fantastic melodic riffs, some great metallic sounding rhythm riffs, and there's a lot of cool acoustic parts happening here. The production on the rhythm guitars is great. It has that classic Gothenburg metallic sound to it that you see in a lot of these old Gothenburg melodic death metal bands coming out in the mid-90s. But it sounds really good on this album. The production, I think, is a little bit better than it was on the Jester race. So there's a lot of cool stuff happening on guitars. Glenn's guitars. Johan on bass. Again, mostly he's just following along with the guitars for the most part, but there are a few places on this album where he sort of does something differently, especially on the parts like in Gyroscope and in Dialogue with the Stars and Jesper Strömblad Transfigured, where there's acoustic guitars happening and then the bass is doing something different from those, and sometimes there's the electric guitars as well, but in those parts with the acoustic guitars, the bass is sort of doing its own thing, which I thought mixed it up a bit because typically he's just been following along with the guitars, and that doesn't doesn't make it as interesting as it could be a lot of the time. But what I did like as compared to previous albums is that the bass is turned up pretty loud so you can hear it throughout, which I thought was a good choice because I always like to hear the bass turned up a bit because it gives the songs more meat, if you sort of get what I'm trying to go with there. Lastly, Björn on drums again is doing a pretty good job. There's a lot of interesting fills happening in between the more simplistic drumming parts, but there's a lot of fast drumming on the song. There's a lot of songs that are faster than songs on the Jester race. Like Jotun has really fast drumming, and it's got this cool double bass happening during the main riff. I really like the way the drums came out on that song particularly. And then also on the slower songs like Jesper Strömblad, Transfigured, he's playing slower, but there's still pretty technical stuff happening here. There's a lot of interesting fills that go on with the shifting parts in the song where it switches over to acoustic and then back to electric. He sort of does different stuff with the drumming there. Now, the production on the drums is much better than it was on the Jester race. I can sort of identify the different types of drums that are being played a little better. The snares have a lot more oomph to them, if you will, and the bass drum has a little bit more meat to it as compared to the previous albums. So Björn does a really good job on the drums here. Well, that's it for the sound of the band. I think they did a pretty good job with this, although I did hear that they did have some trouble actually recording the album because, according to the producer, the band was more interested in goofing off and playing video games than actually recording the album. Let's see, maybe if they weren't goofing off as much, they would have done a better job on the album. But overall, it still came out really well, and I would give it an 8 out of 10 if I had to give it a rating. So that's it for the review. Be sure to subscribe to see the rest of my In Flames discography, as I'll be doing that over the next couple of weeks, as well as some other different reviews and some other videos about metal stuff that I plan to be releasing over the next few weeks. So be sure to check those out, and be sure to like the video if you like this review. And let me know if there's any albums you want me to review that are coming out, since I'm pretty busy with all this stuff I'm doing, so I don't have time to go check out what's coming out now. So let me know which ones you want me to do, and I will see you in the next video I make. See ya.